welcome to New Two Comics. I'm Alejandro,
And I'm Andre.
and today is going to be our first episode of a series called Comic Culture, where we dive into some seminal runs throughout the history of comics and just give you a little deep dive on what they were, their stories, and their impact on comics overall. So today we're going to be talking about the one and only Sentry. Andre, if you want to give us a little rundown on who the Sentry is.
Absolutely, absolutely. I actually have a nice little stack next to me because this is by Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee. And my goodness, I mean, you and I have talked about these interiors time and time again, but even looking at these covers, this one is my favorite. Look how sick that is. Sorry about that glare. It's just absolutely beautiful. When people talk about the Sentry on a macro scale, oftentimes what I hear is, oh, that's Marvel's Superman. I say, no, 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 absolutely not. That is really underlying and undertaking what a beautiful character and who the Sentry is. This is a run where all of a sudden, in the very beginning of the book, we have a man named Bob who wakes up next to his wife, Lindy. When he wakes up, he's like, oh, I just remembered something. I am the most powerful superhero. And not only that, I was actually the first superhero before all the other ones. In our world, we know Fantastic Four was the first that kicked off the Marvel Universe, but the Sentry was actually there in the beginning beforehand. So the whole run is asking the question, okay, is this actually a man who was the most powerful superhero, who had the power of a million exploding suns, who was invulnerable? Or is this a man who is struggling with mental health and is just going crazy and he's not a superhero at all? What I think is so brilliant about this run is that we see the Sentry, we see it's three, right? So we have Bob, we have the Void, and we have the Sentry. And Bob is at the center of this because in some days he's the Sentry who has the power of a million exploding suns, but then in the direct opposite is the Void, who then equalizes that plus some. So for every good thing that's done, the Void is trying to take that away. Now, a lot of these superheroes, they know the Sentry after some time, but they also know the Void. So there's a lot of fear there in how to interact with them. Overall, this is just a run that you are, as the reader, also questioning, did I forget about who this character was, that he was there in the beginning? Or what is happening here that there was a mystery on why he was forgotten. So the run takes you through interactions with Reed Richards, takes you through interactions with Lindy, takes you through the lens of Bob, just to figure out exactly how does the Sentry fit into the Marvel universe.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic, no pun intended. I kind of think of it as like the Blair Witch of comics, where if
Mm,
you know anything about Blair Witch or if you're kind of a film nerd, you know that it sparked off the craze that was found footage,
mm,
right? So if you're back in, I believe it was like the 80s for Blair Witch, you're seeing the advertisements for it and you're thinking that this is a real documentary.
mm,
As we go through this initial Sentry run, you're reading it, and a lot of these panels show it's almost like a breaking of the fourth wall, where these panels show comic covers from the eras of like the 70s and
mm-hmm,
60s. So yeah, Andre can show them for you. So you're looking at that thinking, wow, okay, did I like miss
mm,
something here? And so it's almost like taking you as the reader in as a part of the story itself, which I think is really fantastic. I
mm,
also like that it's a slow burn, for a run that is 5 issues for the initial miniseries, and then you have a few tie-in issues, and then as a separate issue, the finale of it all is the Sentry versus the Void. And I love how it's kind of like a slow burn, right? It's the slow awakening of the collective consciousness of the people within the Marvel universe,
mm.
and you kind of go along with that as you're seeing. Um, Kind of how Andre mentioned earlier, something that is really impactful to me about this comic is the Sentry and Void operate with this sort of karmic relationship, right? So for every good deed, for every 1 million people saved by the Sentry, there's 1 million people killed by the Void,
Yeah.
right? So
Mm-hmm,
you can't have good put in without bad being taken out. And when you have a karmic relationship like that, it essentially is operating like this pendulum where you have Bob swinging between the 2 points. So it's a really unique thing in comics, particularly like superhero comics, where you've got what a lot of people would think to be this Superman of Marvel universe, right? This all powerful, near cosmic level being, but you're not following the superhero, which is what I love so much about it. You're
Mm,
not following the superhero, you're not following the villain,
mm,
you're just following Bob, who's
yeah.
a normal person. I think depending on which run you're reading, he plays, well, I don't want to say plays the role, but as a human being is an addict, right? So at the very
Mm,
beginning of the run, um, it he gets his powers. I guess they put it as through drinking this superhero serum. That's
yeah.
almost like an analogy to a drug itself.
Mm,
And prior to everyone being awakened in their memory of knowing who the Sentry is, his wife walks in and sees him with a bottle and thinks that he's relapsed on alcohol,
yeah.
right? So we're following this man who is through and through human. I think he's a fantastic representation of humanity,
Mm,
right? He's not like this borderline intangible version of strength and morality like a Captain America would be or like a Clark Kent would be.
mm,
He's just Bob, who has come to a lot of the different things that us as normal readers can succumb to or experience in our day to day life. So as we're following Bob through the story, you can see the the mental anguish that it puts him through
mm,
to oscillate between being the sentry, right, which is an ultimate responsibility. We all know with great power comes great responsibility, and dealing with this guilt of being the void, right? What this initial run does so well is take you through him realizing who he is. And what I think plays really, really well off of it is the current miniseries written by the same exact guy, where we're starting to see him play the role of the Sentry, right? This initial one, we see him realize he's a Sentry, but we don't
mm,
really get to see him play the role so much. So we'll get into the current run a little bit later,
mm.
but we can just talk about a few different highlights from the initial 5 issue series, a
Yep.
couple of the tie-in, and then what we think about the finale. So what were some like huge takeaways for you? What did you enjoy the most?
Man, I thought that was great, and I'd also like you to touch on a part that I just thought of hearing you discuss this. I would say one of the highlights for me was seeing the different interactions with people, because again, we find all of a sudden the way that he interacts with Mr. Fantastic, like he was in his wedding, and then the way that he interacts with Hulk, Hulk is like, "Oh, I remember you, Golden Man," but then at the same time, you see that he is scared. He's like, "But okay, are you Golden Man, or are you the Void? Are you the scary one?" And the fascinating thing is, especially for those of us who have read Immortal Hulk run, which I think illuminates Hulk in the best way, the Hulk, especially in his Hulk form, isn't just like, oh, Hulk smash all the time. I think we've kind of moved past that where he's able to communicate better, but he feels juvenile when it comes to this. So honestly, I even have this big panel where you could see him right there. And even in the design, Jay Lee's art, man, is just so stark and it's so dark and so amazing. But we see that there's a respect there and a very difficult relationship in terms of how he's interacted. And so, in general, I'd say a big highlight for me was seeing this world being built, of being like, okay, what is happening here? Like, did this guy really exist? And then these parts are actually connecting. And then the parts are actually connecting because there's this big mystery that Bob is really trying to take down, knock down those Lego pieces. And then each of these different heroes are helping to shape. Spider Man's helping to shape, Hulk is helping to shape, the Fantastic Four is helping to shape, and then things kind of come together. And I'd want to hear what you think as well, like what was a highlight. And even before hearing that too, I'm curious, when you hear about a hero who's this strong, you'd expect the book to be big fights, big action scenes. So I want you to give me a highlight, and I also want you to tell me how impactful was it that this wasn't just an all-out fight, and that instead there was actually an absence of action.
Yeah. So, in fact, what I think is really great about the Sentry is exactly that. Like, you have all of there's power in not using the power. So, even in
Mm,
the finale, where it's the Sentry versus the Void,
mm,
it's not so much this battle between two characters, it's more so a representation of inner anguish, which I
mm,
really love. Um, Thinking into like what got me interested in the Sentry to begin with, because I'm relatively new to the character. I know you've had this run for a while and sort of always loved them since you got into it, but what got me into the Sentry was reading the ongoing miniseries. We're
mm,
currently on issue number 2,
yep,
and it was very mind blowing to me how well written this character is. I think it's perfect that the current author of the miniseries is Paul Jenkins,
yep,
the OG creator of the Sentry. I think he just knows how to write this character super well. Um, when I was reading the miniseries, issue number two, it hit me like a truck. Two
Mm,
things in particular, right? One is this conversation that he has with the Hulk,
mm,
where it's like you're saying, these two people ridiculously powerful. And
mm,
for issue number two of the current miniseries, you basically have the cover, or the cover that I got is Sentry like gut punching the Hulk up through the sky. So you're really going into it thinking that, oh, you're gonna have a battle of the giants
yeah.
here. And that really didn't happen at all. I mean, without getting too deep into what's going on in the story itself,
Mm,
Hulk had, succumbed to some virus that's going on, and crystals shooting out of his body, and the Sentry essentially was just curing him of that,
mm,
for lack of a better term. So there's an initial struggle there, but it's only because Hulk was experiencing pain,
yeah.
and Sentry had to come do something to help him feel better. What really hit hard was the conversation that they had by the campfire, where
Mm,
honestly, I'm a fan of the Hulk being written in this way, probably more so than I've seen him written in other ways,
mm,
albeit I'm not too well versed in the Hulk itself. But I like him being so much more and so much deeper than just this ball of rage that can barely articulate words, and kind of just has temper tantrums. But I like how they limit his vocabulary or his ability to articulate, and so that depth of character has to be brought out in other ways,
mm,
right? So what's kind of operating as a mechanism in the current miniseries is the Sentry's dog being sick, right? A lot of us understand how, despite having really great close relationships with people, whether it's a girlfriend or a friend or a parent, there's a very unique bond between a person and their pet, especially if you're dealing with a moment of mental instability or about depression or anxiety. There's something about that ultimate innocence of your pet that is just always there for you.
mm,
And it's like the weight of life and taxes and work doesn't really exist in that dog's mind or that cat's mind.
mm,
And so it becomes this really, really powerful anchor for Sentry. And when we see that anchor is put into jeopardy, we don't exactly know how the story is going to unfold, because again, we're on issue two of what I think will be an eight
8.
issue
Yeah.
miniseries. So when he's sitting there with Hulk and trying to like break the news to Hulk that his dog is very likely going to pass away, um, it's the innocence that hits you,
Mm,
right? So it's not. It's almost like a perfect amount of words where I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what he says, but he's
mm,
basically saying, that dog was a really good dog,
yeah.
and how he's sad, right?
Yeah.
But when you think of a child trying to articulate something, they don't have the ability to get into, well, I'm feeling this way because of this, and when I think about that, they can just say sad.
Mm,
And what happens to us oftentimes as we grow up, words lose meaning via repetition of the words or overuse of the word, right?
mm,
So if you tell someone I love you every single day for years on end, the impact of hearing that I love you, while the message might still be the same, the meaning and the weight behind the person saying it might feel the same. Eventually, you kind of just get used to hearing that word, which is why
mm.
sometimes when you're in that, great relationship, you almost wish that there was another word to say other
Dang.
than I love you, because
That's
you say
deep.
it so often, right?
That's deep.
Um, on the flip side of that, it's why a lot of relationships, perverse relationships, can keep you hooked in there, right? Because if you have someone that so rarely tells you that they
Wow.
love you or that I'm proud of you, you seek that out because we equate rarity to value. So you might also subconsciously think that somebody's love is more value because they make you earn it, rather than somebody who's unconditionally loving of you. And so that I wouldn't say is necessarily what's applying to the story at hand, but I think it goes to show how when you have the Hulk limited in his vocabulary, we're not really getting into the weeds with, oh, well, he's just saying sad, but if I say I'm sad, you're not going to understand that I'm really struggling right now. I would
Mm,
have to articulate to you that I'm really struggling in order for you to get it. If you think I'm sad, you might think I'm sad because I went and I got a blind bag for Daredevil and I pulled
mm.
the same Muse cover for the sixth time in a row, right?
Right. Right.
But when the Hulk is saying something like that, it kind of hits a little bit harder, almost like if your 3 year old came to you and said, I'm sad. Um, so it was just really, really impactful to me to see that conversation. And it's what wanted me to do a little bit of a deeper dive and more of a character study into the Sentry himself, because, getting into it as a new reader, I really did expect him to be showing off all of these insane powers. And
Mm,
instead, I got what I think is one of the most beautifully written characters in the entire Marvel universe, and the greater universe of superheroes in general. Another thing that I think is absolutely phenomenal, I think it's a testament to genius, is how they use the format of a mini series so intentionally,
Mm.
right? We're kind of living in an era where miniseries, particularly in Marvel, tend to be a little bit more common just because, it's paper media, which is harder to turn a profit on. It's more difficult. You have editorial, which maybe isn't so deep into the art itself, and it's why you have artists being underpaid with the requisite to deliver no matter what.
Mm.
And it makes them a little bit more hesitant to say that, hey, let's open up the bag of an ongoing run and see how far we make it. You've already seen several ongoing runs get canceled.
Yep.
A good example of this, not in Marvel but in DC, is the most recent Green Arrow ongoing run. I think was one of the most best written Green Arrow runs
Really?
in a long, long time, but it just didn't garner enough attention. It wasn't on enough pull lists and
So it
didn't
got
garner enough
cut.
profits. So DC cut it, right? And despite the hardcore fans literally coming up with a petition to bring that run back, if the money's not there, the run won't be there.
Mm.
So a way of sort of circumventing that risk is say, okay, well, we can commit to 5 issues and give you a little mini series. I know D-Rod in our group really hates the abundance of miniseries in Marvel. And so, it's a little example of how like the finances can get in and sort of drag down art a little bit. But this is not an example of that. I think both the initial inception or the introduction of the character of the Sentry being a miniseries and the current ongoing miniseries is such a it's used as a tool
Yeah.
essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what they're doing is putting together this really, really like poignant emotional story that's in its own protected capsule. I feel like, and again, we're speaking on issue 2 here of the current miniseries, so we
Mm.
don't exactly know how it's going to end, though I have a supreme level of faith in it being phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
I think the story that they're putting together, if you were to tell me that after issue 8, issue 9, we're going to start getting into the romance or a little bit more into action, I think it would serve to take away from the depth of emotion that they're really trying to put together in that series. And it's the same thing with the original introduction of the character, but that miniseries takes you along as if you are a part of that story. You're figuring out who the Sentry is as
Yep.
he's remembering himself, as his friends are remembering him. And in both instances, it's the Hulk that, I think as a result of his condition, doesn't forget
Yep.
ultimately.
Yep.
So it makes me think, not even to get into this, but just as a tangent, seeing how the Hulk operates in these memory wiping scenarios, it kind of makes you wonder what's going on in the current movies with Spider-Man, with
Mm.
Bruce Banner being in that. Are we
Yeah.
going to see another example of what the Sentry showed, where the Hulk is almost impervious to his memory being wiped out like that? Bruce Banner
Facts.
might not remember, but what about the Hulk?
Yep. Facts, man.
So I just think it
Facts.
was a phenomenal example of the use of a mini series and how, without needing to lean too much into the entertainment side of things or the action side of things, you can have this really, really powerful of fist character be the most emotionally deep. You know what I mean?
Bro, you're bringing up so much good. And in one of the biggest, the thing that strikes me in what you're saying and trying to understand this character is the reminder and bringing us back to real life and power and what power dynamics can do. So, if people are familiar with Spider Man and the black suit and a symbiotic relationship, it doesn't matter how much Peter can do in life to save the people around him if Mary Jane is saying to him, "You've changed because you have this symbiotic relationship and you're not you." Peter can say, "But I'm saving the world. I'm saving the world. I'm saving people around me." But she's like, "No, that doesn't matter because you at your core are different." And so I think it's this reminder that limitless power, or if you think you have a genie, I want to live forever. You think of like Wolverine and a lot of these other heroes who've lived for a long, long time, and they talk about not wanting to get close to people because of the curse of falling in love and then them dying and then starting over again. Having infinite power or having just about infinite power can be a curse. And I think that's really insane and really clever, especially in this run, because it's the reminder of, man, like having all this power doesn't necessarily mean that you can just stay in your echo chamber. Even if you save a bunch of people, you're still going to have to go to sleep at night and you're still going to be next to someone, or you're going to have friendships. Can you connect with those people? That's what I really like about Paul. I could say this about myself. Look at him in the middle there under Spider-Man. I thought Spider-Man was interesting too. His power and how he impacts people impacted Peter Parker to even feel a little bit out of character. And I know that's more because depending on your writer, you write a character differently. But I do think it was purposeful. Peter Parker felt more cynical and he felt more like hardened. He was like, "Who are you?" and like, "What are you doing here?" He wasn't joking, which I found which was interesting. But I just think power and holding that power in the way that it impacts your relationships, it just goes to show that you can't avoid that unless you do live under a rock and you are isolated away from people. It's just that reminder truly that great power comes great responsibility, and part of that responsibility is the way that others feel around you. And it's like, man, what an impact from this character to feel that. And then I want to real quick lean into what you were talking about, the current miniseries and the dog, because in issue one, the Sentry and Bob was talking about how he watched Laika, the space dog, be sent away into space, and so his connection with dogs, his connection with seeing a dog be sent into space, not knowing it's sent into space, and knowing that the dog is going to die, that is the crux of who Bob is, saying, how can I help the one who is helpless? And what an amazing device. And so, even in this original series, it's kind of the same thing. He's trying to discover who he is, but he's so desperately trying to cling on to, but how can I really figure this out? And then, if I am figuring this out, how can I be the one to do good? And what a drive to do good. I'm curious, Ale, if you've ever felt, because for me, let me start. For me, I'm an internal processor. And in being an internal processor, I can retreat inwardly because I could say if I retreat inwardly, then I could figure it out and then I can let my wife or let my friends know, okay, I have it figured out because I figured out what was happening inside. I also know how crippling it can be to just try to be inward because when I'm inward, then my wife tells me, "Oh, like you feel quieter, you feel all these ways." So it's actually not doing, it can be healthy. I'm not saying internal or external is healthy, unhealthy. I'm saying it can lean that way. So, did you find any relation to the character Bob? And if so, how so?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things I want to touch on what you just said. I think that was a great way of putting like dealing with borderline unlimited power. I think it's really easy for us. I think it's analogous to like immortality, but it's a lot easier for us to see immortality and say, okay, well, I wouldn't want that because,
Mm,
once that initial, oh, I can't die wears off, and then you see everyone around you die, it just becomes a curse,
mm,
right? And you can sort of see if you keep up with Invincible at all. Immortal himself
yeah,
eventually we know goes
yeah,
on to just become crazy and break because he loses touch with his humanity. The same thing can happen with unlimited power, but you just have to think and apply that a little bit deeper to say, hey, what is keeping the sanity of all these characters
yeah,
and us as individuals without any power? It's your connection to humanity, it's your connection to community, right? I think that same thing applies to what you were just saying about being an internal processor, right? If we look at it at a bit of a micro scale, to say what does keeping in touch with your humanity and keeping in touch with your community look like, I totally agree with you. It's not healthy or unhealthy to be an internal versus external processor. There's not a right answer there.
right,
What there is the necessity for communication,
yeah,
right? So if you're with someone who is an external processor or needs to get everything out the second that they're feeling the emotion, as opposed to someone that sort of retreats a little bit, analyzes everything that went on with them, what's an emotional reaction versus what is my desired outcome of this,
mm,
that can create this feeling of we're not on the same page here. So yeah, I just think it's the necessity for communication is you got to let your partner know even if they're the external processor because it might start leading them to think, hey, you're not present with me or what's wrong, and then because you haven't processed everything yet, you're more likely to be like, oh, nothing's wrong, but they know you, they can
mm,
tell something's going on, and so
right,
it's these gaps in communication that can slowly erode your connection to what I would think on a greater scale is humanity community. That's just an example of what that's like to do with just one other person. But as
yes,
far as your question to me, as in like what did I relate to? It's not so much let me figure out how I want to say this. It's not like a personality type or a communication type, but what I think they tackled so well that I often find myself is like deep in these thought holes is to what extent are you your actions versus to what extent are you your thoughts? Because
wow,
you might hear someone that is of the philosophy, it's like, hey, you are not your thoughts,
Hmm.
right? And then someone's like, okay, well, just because you did something bad 3 years ago, you're not that action, right? You're not that bad thing that you did. We're all human. We make mistakes.
Hmm.
And what I think is a another example of something that is both a tool but also a curse is us our ability as human beings to develop perspectives and philosophies and value systems can be a blessing and a curse because you can always get to a point where you either find too much meaning in everything or you find no meaning at all.
Hmm.
It's like the
That's good.
road to nihilism where essentially you're like, okay, well then nothing means anything. So you
That's
have to
good.
find your balance via value systems and philosophies in order to make meaning of our existence here on this earth, whether that be via religion, whether it be via
Hmm.
philosophy, whether it be via I wake up every day and I try to do something good. Whatever your perspective is, you always work on, again, sort of a pendulum of like too much meaning or not enough meaning. And what I think the Void and Sentry tackles so well, particularly through the lens of mental health, right? Because we can look at more obvious examples. For example, someone that might suffer from borderline or bipolar personality disorder, who is having a manic or depressive episode in the context of bipolar disorder,
Hmm.
are they who they were? Are the actions that they committed while they weren't of sound mind, is that a representation of who they are?
Hmm.
And furthermore, once you get out of that, I imagine it's a horrible thing to experience. And once you feel like you are of sound mind, how do you cope with the potential guilt or shame or embarrassment of the
Hmm.
behaviors you exhibited while you weren't fully there?
Hmm.
Like, to what extent do we hold Sentry responsible for the actions of the Void,
Hmm.
right? And I think that the way, and I'd like to get into this a little bit deeper with you, is sort of the nature of the Void. Um, but just to sort of wrap things up, I constantly think to myself, you know, or in relationships that I have with people that are very close to me, say, if you want to turn over a new leaf, like you weren't the best person that you wanted to be in your 20s, so your 30s, you're going to be a new version of
Hmm.
yourself. And you say, okay, well, today today marks a new day for me. I'm Alejandro 2.0,
Hmm.
right? Being Alejandro 2.0 does not all of a sudden make me no longer responsible for the behaviors and the actions of Alejandro 1.0,
Hmm.
right? So you kind of have to come up with this balance of saying, hey, I'm going to be compassionate towards myself, while at the same time holding accountability for what I've done. And as far as that, like pertaining to the Sentry, right? You can see in this initial run when they come up with how do we deal with this once they find out that the Sentry is the Void, and the ultimate decision, brought apart by accepting, like Robert himself accepting, hey, dude, we gotta forget about me, and so he was a willing participant in that.
Yeah.
Um, how do you sort of deal with that, right? And he, of course, is a very like exaggerated example, but when you're, you know, thinking at night, or at least as far as what I relate to, is like,
Hmm.
hey, to what extent am I my thoughts? To what extent am I my actions? How can I reconcile with the versions of me that I don't think are representative of who I am or who I want to be?
Hmm.
And I think it's a really interesting character study and the human ability to think in that way. Um, what I think is particular about the Void, which I want to get into with you, is how the Void attacks, how he operates as a villain. Right,
Hmm.
this guy is not a he comes up with razor sharp
Right.
blade hands and slices you to bits, and you walk away from the battle
Hmm.
bruised and battered and bloody. He is pretty much entirely an emotional villain.
Hmm.
So what he serves as for the Sentry, pretty much at all times, his tendrils, once they touch you, he can become your Void, right?
Hmm.
And so when we have these crossover issues with like the Hulk and Spider-Man, we kind of see a glimpse into what they experience when the
Yeah.
Void is attacking them. The Hulk's one I thought was really interesting because the Void isn't even like coming up with new things, right? It's basically telling you that your worst fears about yourself are true, and then finds those little bits and pieces of you acting what you might consider to be out of character. So you
That's
committing
good.
actions that betray the version of yourself that you want to be,
Yep.
We can't escape that. We are human beings. You will never be the idealized version of yourself. You will always have moments of weakness where you behave in a manner that you don't want to represent yourself as.
Mm.
And you get like embarrassment from it, or like think anxiety. Oh my God, last night, what did I do? Blah blah
Yep.
blah.
Yep.
So the void basically takes these examples like of the Hulk. You said you were going to look for a cure, but you didn't really look for the cure. And when you were a scientist, a young arrogant scientist making a weapon of mass destruction, you gave the obligatory, I didn't want my work to turn
Wow.
into this,
Yep.
but you were curious about what was going to happen. Those things are true. It's a symptom of being human. It is a symptom of the human condition. But when you use those examples of when I was acting outside of the person or the character that I want to be, and you use those as examples to confirm your fears and insecurities, to say you will never be this person. You
Mm.
cannot be a good person because you did this,
Mm.
right? Then you don't need someone to come and stab you or beat you up or bruise you. You have just had your soul attacked, essentially. You attacked yourself. And when I was reading that, I was thinking, because I have a big beef with how the Hulk was handled in the MCU,
Mm.
right? Particularly like when he lost that fight to Thanos, he retreated inwards, and we didn't see him for the rest of the Infinity Saga. And even when expecting him maybe to go participate in a big battle at the end of Endgame, he was stuck running around underground.
Yeah.
So I think that was like a pretty horrible usage of the Hulk. But when we talk about the Hulk retreating inwards, I think this is an actually good example of something that attacks the Hulk in a way where he no longer knows how to deal with that, right?
Yeah.
And he might handle it in one of two ways, just like we talk about how you process things in one of two ways. You
Right.
can either handle it externally via temper tantrum, which we know the Hulk did in Hoboken, New Jersey, in the original Sentry run.
Mm.
Is he's feeling all of this pain and this fear and this confirmation that he's a monster, he's not a good person, he can't be a hero. All of those insecurities are coming out.
Yeah.
And like a child, he even says it, like a child, I was hurt and I wanted to hurt something back, and he goes on this temper tantrum.
It's good.
So I think it is such a unique literary device to have the void attack in a way where he just gets into your soul. He attacks your soul. He
Mm.
takes all of the things that are symptoms of the human condition and compiles a folder of evidence to tell you that you are not the person that you strive to be or that you think you are. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
No, that's so good. We have these portions of self that are present, and you have these questions of self that are present. And what I think is so compelling about the character is being able to dive in and to say, and you're watching the news, you're like, how could a human do such bad things? You can also equally say, how could a human do such good things? I never would be a philanthropist and donate all this money if I had it, or maybe I would, or would I rob this bank, or would I commit this evil crime? And what I like about what you said was that this wasn't a villain that's scheming. This wasn't like a okay, I was walking down to the store in 1930 and then this thing happened and then from that day I decided to be this villain. This is instead like invading the mental schema. Like this is instead saying what is present in yourself and then I utilize that. And that happens in life too, in abusive relationships. It's not like, especially mentally abusive and verbally abusive, people use what people end up being vulnerable about. Like I grew up being very self-conscious about my gap teeth. This comes from my father's side of the fam. Like it's always been present. So if that was something that was deep rooted and somebody close to me knew that, that would be something that they use against me. And so in the same way, I can be let in by somebody and then I can either use that to love or I can use that to use as a weapon. And so I totally agree with you, man. Like those tendrils, and by just touching, by just being around people that he was close to over time, the void being close to these people and knowing this is how I can actually reach you is through these deep things. That's why it's like a lot of people might be confused reading the issue 5 and like being like, okay, I'm ready for the big fight, and almost feeling like there's this void in this absence of an ending. And I think that's the point. Obviously, there's 5 issues, and then you have the Sentry versus, yeah, I have these two. You have also these issues: Sentry versus the Void, Sentry versus Fantastic Four, Sentry versus Spider-Man, Sentry versus X-Men, which I think this is actually the sickest cover. It's such a good cover. But if you were just to read these 5, you would honestly be like, what did I just like? What just happened? And I think that is the point. That's how the void feels, and that's how life sometimes feels. That it isn't tied into a bow. Like this is the actual horrors of life, is that it's unsettling, and it's not just the save the day and then it's time for another one. This is a we have to continue to walk through. So I thought that was just I thought to answer your question again, it's like, yeah, life itself is the fear, like navigating life itself. It isn't just that he has, Doc Ock arms, or I'm trying to think of another villain that would be good. He's not the Knoll who is the god of symbiotes and taking over the world. Like, this is life itself manifested in these negative ways. And yes, in the miniseries, he does cause typhoons and does interact on a physical scale. But if we are talking about like life itself and in these ways, it's, I think, a great way to exercise like our impulse thoughts too. Like, I have weird impulse thoughts. I don't act on those impulse thoughts, but guess what? Those are a natural part of the human brain, a survival portion of the human brain that's being exercised. I'm not gonna drive onto the other side of traffic, but I've thought about it because it just happens, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
just flying 60 miles per hour down the road. So I thought the Void, like you said, man, it's a great character study overall. Just great character study.
Yeah, and what you were saying about how like that feeling you walk away from once you finish the series of this like unsettling, uh this doesn't feel like it's wrapped up in a bow with a nice great satisfying conclusion, is so in line with how this character is meant to operate, right? Because how many times in life are
Yes.
you seeking closure to finish a chapter and move on, and life just doesn't give you that closure? That's why a
Facts.
lot of people end up texting their ex well after the breakup looking for closure when you
Facts.
know damn well you're not getting closure from that. The
Facts.
closure is the breakup, right?
Yeah.
So it's a really cool thing. In fact, part of the reason why I read it and I sat down, it was actually the first thing that I attempted to record a video on, and I just
Mm,
kept getting like my thoughts. I just kept going and going, and I was like, there's no way I can put this into a short,
mm.
or at least without more practice. And I definitely wanted to talk about it for this series in general, knowing that we're a channel that's meant to sort of help bring people who are new to comics into comics, and I think we do a great job covering a lot of the modern things that are going on, maybe the
Yeah.
most entertaining runs, a lot of absolute Batman. But I don't want anyone to have any fear to go in and read some older runs and see just how impactful they are.
Yes.
And at the
Yes.
same time, in doing that, as an artist myself and as someone who loves to study history myself, I think the evolution of comics is such a cool thing to study,
Yes.
right? When you go back and you look at like OG Captain America and OG Superman, a lot of the reasons why it's potentially not even as enjoying to read right now is because there's like separation. It's almost like there's this wall between you as the reader and the things you are reading.
Mm,
Captain America and its original runs, and again, so much respect to
mm.
those OG runs, right?
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as far as what they set up and allowed for it to happen is, you look at this OG run of Captain America, right? When we're in the thralls of World War II and coming out of it, it's serving as this like propaganda tool to unite you around that, or this
Mm,
idea that they're trying to get across to you.
mm.
Superman, in a lot of ways, to me, is reminiscent of like American propaganda for that nuclear family, don't do drugs, kid kind of thing.
Mm.
And all of these characters and who they are today and what they represent today is so much deeper than what they
Facts.
were when they started.
Mm-hmm.
And comics went through this transition period where back in the day you could tell your art teacher that you wanted to be a comic book artist and they would laugh at you. So
Yeah.
even within the realm of art, it had this stigma against it. It was what
Right.
the nerdy kids read, and it's just superheroes and men in tights and stuff like that. um, and it's slowly become more and more accepted into like the zeitgeist of pop culture because
Good word.
of runs like the Sentry, allowing it to become a tool and a window into the human psyche, and
Mm.
it functioning quite literally as art, as entertaining as it is and as cool as it is, and how amazing it is to look at the vibrant art and whatnot. And I think that there is a definite place for runs that are just all about the action, man, and you just want to read that and see someone beat the hell out of somebody else. I
Facts.
think that is just as valid, and
Facts.
I read those as well. But having runs like the Sentry, that on every level, the more you talk about it, the more you think about it, the more you realize that this really is a it's just a delivery system to show you a reflection, to hold up this mirror of what the human condition is. And I use
Mm,
that term a little bit, but I think it's such an apt term for what the Sentry is.
it's great.
He's just by having the powers, he's not someone that you watch to go see him beat up someone else.
It's great.
You're watching a human being with so much thrown back at you to be like, hey, this is how I deal with stuff. Or, I know what's come up in my life a lot, as far as a really powerful lesson that I learned, is brutal honesty with oneself. You
Mm,
know, I talked about earlier about how we all commit actions that we would not want to represent ourselves or we would not want to identify with, but we
mm,
commit them anyways. It is not right to take it as far. The right answer for that is not to do what the void does and have that serve as evidence that you will never be the person that you're striving to be because you did something and you thought this certain way or whatever, right? You cannot take it that far. But on the same note, you can't pretend that that didn't
come
happen
on.
and that you weren't that person,
Talk to him.
right? So this the lesson that we have to learn as we grow and mature as adults is
Mm,
reconciliation with the versions and the parts of ourselves that we want to get better than, and it requires brutal, gut-wrenching honesty with oneself to be able to face those things and say, hey, I did that, I will never do it again. and
mm-hmm.
and maybe even think into why did I do that.
Yep.
The void is such a great, like, it's an aptly named character on multiple levels, right? That's the genius of Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee in this run, is that the void serves as like, okay, well, I felt like something was missing at the ending. That's the
Mm,
void,
mm,
and I feel like you walk outside and there's this part of me that's not here. Like it is multifaceted. It's a multifaceted analogy, but what I think is so great as far as him being the void in terms of what's in your face about it is when you think about what causes us to exhibit a lot of these behaviors, right? What causes a lot of people to find themselves in the thralls of addiction beyond just the chemical, dopamine searching part of your brain when you take a hit of something and you're always searching for that again. But what puts you in the position to feel like that's the answer to your troubles? What oftentimes makes you go sleep with a bunch of people and really you just want to feel loved? What
mm,
causes you to stay with someone in an abusive relationship? And so many times, the best words that we can come up with to describe what we're feeling that causes us to look for something like that is, I feel like I have this hole in my heart. I
dang
feel like
good.
I'm trying to fill a hole in my heart, aka a void,
Void.
right? So
Dang
this
good.
void, not slicing you up, not beating you up. He touches you, he gets his tendrils in you, and he makes you feel that
Yeah.
hole in your heart
Mm,
that causes you to then lash out and to second guess yourself, to feel like you're never gonna, achieve your dreams or be the person you want to be. You're
mm,
undeserving of love. You're undeserving of the title of a superhero. And the same thing on the other side with Sentry. What is the Sentry? It's something that's supposed to be all vigilant, all protecting,
right.
right? So you've got these two massively powerful things to the human soul, which is wanting to protect that which you love, feeling the responsibility.
Yeah.
If I have the power to go out and save, then am I responsible for the death if I don't do something,
Right.
right? If you're
Right.
given that power. And on the other side, you have what can be so devastating to human beings, particularly when you inject innocence in there, which is
Mm,
why I think the Hulk's interactions with the Void are so like tear jerking. Is we as human beings have like an innate sympathy for innocence, and I
mm,
think a lot of that is projection, right? That's why you know it is. We don't want to see a puppy get kicked in a movie, but we can watch a person die and kind of be
dang.
like, oh, that sucked, or
Dang.
potentially feel no sympathy at all. It's
Dang.
part of the reason why Robert Kirkman, when he was having the Conquest fight, he put in a snapshot scene of a dog dying when Conquest was going through, because to him, he doesn't understand why we have all this sympathy for an animal, but you don't show that same sympathy for your fellow humans.
Dang.
A lot of that, I think, is because we know we are not innocent, and therefore we're assuming that the other person must have done something that allows to take that edge off of watching innocent life die, except for women, children, babies, these things that in society we view to be pillars of innocence.
Mm,
And so
mm,
Hulk is really well done because he's reminiscent of that childlike innocence. And
that's
when you
good.
see the void tearing into Hulk in particular, it's almost like, to an extent, I definitely believe that it's relatable, but it's almost like pulling you to be also more sympathetic. And I
Mm,
just think it's so genius because it shows you the different ways in which we all suffer from, in one way or another, having felt like we have a hole in our heart in one way or another. So I just think it is just genius galore. I think that it is criminal that this character is underrated and not a lot of people know about it.
Mm,
But I think at the same time that makes sense because it's deeper art, it's impactful, it's painful, and at a lot of times it's not always what you want to sit down and watch at the end of the day when it
mm,
takes you on this like mental journey and brings up a lot of these feelings. So I think it sits right where it's in its own vein. I just wish more people knew about it, which is why we're doing this. I do have a second question for you, which is more like less a touchy feeling question and a more of, hey, can you explain this to me? Um, I also watched Thunderbolts, which if you haven't seen it already, they have their own. It's the Sentry's introduction into the MCU,
mm,
so it's not the same as the comics
mm.
in terms of okay, we all forgot the Sentry and we're reintroducing a forgotten character. It kind of takes you through the origin story of Bob being this guy that's sort of taken off the streets, and they do this
Mm.
testing with the super soldier serum, and they didn't expect it to work, and then it does work, and they think he doesn't have powers. They find out he does have powers. Of course, the government then is like, all right, fantastic, I have a new puppet, until he realizes why should I listen to you? I'm essentially a god. And then that's the crux of the final conflict of the movie.
Mm.
But it's how the void operates because I watched that and it's very evident in the movie that Sentry and the void are the same people. There is no misconception and this character of the void that's coming in and they're fighting and at the end you find out that they're the same.
Mm.
And they're not operating in split bodies, right?
Yeah.
So you'll never see the void and the Sentry in the same room at the same time. It's
Yeah.
either the void or the shadow version of the void, which is the Sentry.
Yeah.
Kind of similar to what I'm seeing in the new miniseries, where there's several clips. Like you can tell when Sentry is turning into the void,
Right.
whether it be through his eyes showing his mental state. Another really cool thing is how they use eyes are the windows of the soul. A
Right.
lot of times that's the reflection of his mental state, and then when the Sentry fully takes over, has that tsunami, or I'm sure at some point we might get a flashback to when he was off Earth committing all of these horrible crimes as the Void.
Right.
In the original series, it's presented in a way where you might actually see Sentry fighting the Void,
Yeah.
and you can kind of see them. So I'm not certain, mostly because this is like my first read, and I'm sure that there's several more runs of the character I could read to get clarification on that.
Mm.
But do you would you mind like explaining a little bit more if you've read more on the character?
Yeah.
How does he typically
No, I think
show up
I
in
think
the
that's great. And
media?
even here's an old ad again. This is, them pretending that this was from back in the day, and you see the void in the background, see Sentry on the ground. Paul Jenkins, as he was writing, especially initially, so he created the Sentry. I know that there was some purposeful ambiguity, and I think that was very helpful in this initial run to invoke a, oh dang, like this is just one person. So I think there is a purposeful, as he was kind of explaining, because I was listening to an interview that he had before he did this miniseries, because I was like, oh dang, the miniseries is coming out this year, like what awesome timing. And initially that was kind of the feeling, was first off, let's try to introduce this character, let's use this device, and then let's also try to subvert your expectation where it's this outside force, but it's actually just this triality, this three people, three beings kind of existing, and how those are interacting. And then you have these things that are illuminated more. So if there's ambiguity in this initial run, then you end up having another Paul Jenkins run, and then it's John Romita Jr., who, and I'm indifferent on his art. It depends. It has to be the right day for me. That art was okay on that run, but that run dives into a little bit more him interacting with this therapist, and then okay, it's really settling in. Like it's really, I think something to keep in mind is in 2026 we're able to have this macro. Okay, we can get Marvel Unlimited, boom, just knock things out, read it even forward, backwards, backwards, forwards. But if you're putting yourself in the 2000s when it's coming out, you're discovering these things as it's going on. So you have this series, then you have that series that's happening there again, and then all of a sudden you have New Avengers, which is also happening, and then the Void is at the center of that. And then later on in 2018, which is honestly, I think Jeff Lemire did an amazing job, same writer creator of Sweet Tooth. Jeff Lemire had a run in 2018 that also illuminates on it as well. So I would just say that, yeah, I think there's something effective about showing just the depths of how much he's fighting himself. there's something that is very creative and really cool in seeing that. And then I do think that there was just this mystery element that he was purposefully trying to keep, especially at the time when this was initially
Yeah,
presented.
when you put it like that, it makes a lot more sense. It's so, in other words, it's character development,
Yeah.
not contradiction.
Yes.
Because
Good.
what we can also do this too is throughout that initial run, a lot of it he doesn't even know that
Right.
he is the void,
Yep.
right? And even when he remembers that he's the void, we can go back in time and see that that wasn't a forever thing. He wasn't the Sentry the entire time, also knowing he was the void.
Yeah.
He was under the impression that the void was his greatest enemy until they found out they're one and the same,
Yep.
and at which point memory, collective consciousness all gets wiped. So it's character development too, because at the end of the series, I actually had to go back today to reread it. How did this all end?
Mm.
Because at the end of Sentry versus the Void, it looks like they just wipe everyone's memories again, and
Yeah.
we're not going to get the Sentry. And this is a
Mm.
cool little mini series. You can kind of tell at the very end when he goes, and it'll escape me the name of his sidekick, but they go to the burger shop, and another thing, I don't know if we mentioned this or not, but Bob Reynolds has this terrible agoraphobia when
Mm.
he's operating as Bob Reynolds. And so he goes out with his wife. His wife says, "Hey, remember what the therapist says? You're not afraid. You just think you are."
Yeah.
And, he has this courage, and he has a flashback once he sees that it's his
Mm.
sidekick not remembering, um, working at that burger shack. And he has this flashback of when they were together, and it was almost like an ad. I don't know if you can pull it up in the last few pages, but it's this ad where him and his sidekick are saying, "Oh, a chili dog has the big chili dog has the ability to quench our hunger. It's
Mm.
humanity's only hope," and whatnot. And he remembers that, and as a result of it, he orders the chili dog, kind of hinting that, hey, he didn't fully forget.
Mm.
Now, knowing that he didn't fully forget, that means he also remembers that he is the void, and it could be because of that we start to see the void and the Sentry operate as one shared body
Mm.
throughout the rest portrayed in social media, or not social media, but media in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can kind of see if you pick it up a little bit there. That's him and his sidekick saying. So yeah, I think that it's a good way to put it would be that the portrayal of the void and the Sentry as either being one shared like physical entity or not is more a symptom of character development, and it's a really good like plot device to leave us in the dark about the Sentry being the void.
It's good.
Awesome. I was gonna add, because I think we're coming up on a good time to wrap up here in a little bit. What
Nice.
would you think, you personally, um, what's the overall impact on reading the Sentry? You've read a little bit more than I have,
Yeah.
but your overall reading and seeing Sentry portrayed throughout media, what's that impact on you as a reader, and what do you think would be the overall impact it has on comics as a larger media?
Overall impact on me is the reminder for my advocacy of good representation all around. So what I mean by that is if we have a run, there's a 2023 Sentry run. Okay, spoiler alert. Here's your warning. Cool. All right. There was the King in Black, which was the symbiote Null, and in his story, it was a big event a couple years ago. He rips the Sentry in half and kills him. Dumb power scaling, should not have happened. The writer also acknowledged this. Because of that, then you had these new people who gained the Sentry's power, and there were about like 5 different people who had the Sentry's power, and it was navigating along. And one of the weakest portions of that run, I didn't like the run at all. Unfortunately, respect to writers, respect to teams, it just wasn't for me. One of the weakest portions of it was that they just kind of roasted Bob at some point on just being like, well, he was a privileged white guy who didn't have a disability that was as impactful as my disability. It was a weird missed opportunity, even though they were trying their best to keep it as a diverse subset. So, what I mean is, why I think this is impactful is because when it comes to mental health, disability, socioeconomic status, when it comes to race, all these portions, it's understanding that all these have an opportunity to be represented and represented well. So the impact for me is just that. This is a great subsection of an awesome way to show the horrors of the mental and also to show the highlights of the mental. On the comic world, I think it is a good subsection again in that same way. If I want to read some good action, I'm gonna read Immortal Hulk again. If I want that horror and that feel, I'm gonna read that. If I want to see Captain America go crazy, I'm gonna read his Ed Brubaker run. If I'm going somewhere for a mental health, I don't want to call it a break, but you know what I mean, like a mental health impact, it's going to be to the Sentry, which is so interesting because it subverts your expectation. Yes, we see action sometimes, but this is not going to be what you're expecting if you've never read it. So I'm going to throw that back to you. How do you find this to be for your personal impact and then general impact? And then after you answer that, then we can give maybe some reading suggestions and wrap it up there. So what are you thinking when it comes to this?
Yeah, that was a beautiful answer. I think for me as the reader, the biggest impact that it had on me, which I don't even know if this will sound corny or not, but it's such a stark reminder that we are all simultaneously beneficiaries and victims of the human condition.
Mm,
So the reason why we should feel empathetic towards people, whether they're a minority group or whether they are a individual victim of disabilities,
mm,
is because at the baseline we are all human beings,
that part.
and we can understand via empathy what it might be like to be in that situation and behave accordingly, right? So I think it just shows, you know, as I was saying earlier, how we can always think to a point where thinking in and of itself becomes meaningless. We have to find a balance between reconciling with our past while
Mm,
at the same time not allowing it to define us. And pretty much no matter what your socioeconomic status was growing up, no matter what your current financial status was, no matter how supportive your parents are,
mm,
or whether or not you don't have parents at all, we are all we all have the ability to either have great mental health or lack thereof. In other
mm,
words, it is not a moral failure to struggle with your mental health. And I think having representations of that is super, super important,
right.
because a lot of people might think, oh, well, you know, my parents weren't there for me and I was able to get this done. Or we can throw that out at other people and be vitriolic human beings,
Mm,
or we can choose to be fundamentally understanding. We can exercise discernment without passing judgment. And I think having more and more representations of that in media
mm,
is really, really important, particularly media forms that might target the younger audience. I would say that this is pretty evidently not for children. This isn't like reading a
yeah.
child level Spider-Man
Yeah.
book, but as you're starting to get into young adulthood, to start to realize these things about yourself, might even be getting to an age where you yourself are beginning to struggle with mental health.
Yeah.
This is a book that you're not excluded from, and I think it's important to address those things through portrayals and social media as in TV, movies, books, whatever you name it,
Mm,
to talk about it and get it out there. And that kind of also bridges into my greater point about what I think its impact on the world of comics is I'm a huge proponent for comics using these really awesome, fun characters and plot lines and powers as a way of representing things that are very real and sobering and human. So the more that we get humanity in comics,
mm,
I love it. I love the mutant metaphor. I love
yeah.
Sentry as mental health. I
Yeah.
love it all. So Sentry, I think, is probably, at least in my opinion, the most one of the most impactful
Mm,
comics for mental health, as so far as it pertains to mental stability and all of the
yeah.
characteristics that I mentioned before, as far as reconciling with your past. Um, and I think it's great. I think it opens the door for many more people to also tackle that. I think it's really cool having authors who, I don't know if the right word would be specialize in, but really, really stand out as far as tackling the human psyche, like Lemire. He also had a really interesting run on Moon Knight, which I
Mm,
think Moon
mm,
Knight would be just as valid as talking about how
so
Moon Knight
good.
deals with mental health,
So
because
good.
that's a different facet of mental health, right?
Mm,
So the Century is really talking about our structure emotionally and stability, whereas there's also different forms of mental illness, if that's what you want to call it, which cause you to question your own reality. So we're all victims and beneficiaries
Yeah.
of the human condition,
Yeah.
as long as we stay pertinent to exercising that in the right way. And I think spreading empathy is huge. And the best way to educate people on empathy is showing them what people might be suffering from in a way that is easy for you to engage with and might show you that you also might suffer from something like this. So
Good.
I think it's phenomenal.
Dang good.
Um, I'll have you sort of tackle a couple
Perfect.
of recommendations for people. We
Yeah.
already talked about the current miniseries.
Yep.
Do yourself a favor and pick that up. We're only on issue number 2, but
Yep.
if there's some other things that you've read, definitely hit it.
All right. For my general list of recommendations, and also our biggest suggestion is read it. Even if people say it wasn't good, but you're interested in reading it, read it and discover for yourself if you like it or not, because your favorite run could be my least favorite or vice versa. 2000 and 2005, Paul Jenkins wrote those runs. He invented the character. I think those are the best place to start. If you want a big macro scale, then Sentry appears in New Avengers, appears in New Illuminati in Siege by Brian Michael Bendis. He also appears in King in Black in issue 1, but that's really not the best for Sentry. And then 2018, if we're talking about one person who can write Sentry, I'm not going to say, honestly, just as well, and it feels great, very cohesive. It's Jeff Lemire. 2018 run is also great. And honestly, low key, some of my favorite art for the Sentry other than the 2000s run. And then otherwise, if you're trying to see him in the MCU, like mentioned earlier, please check out Thunderbolts. But yeah, I'll just say my final point. Overall, again, Sentry is absolutely amazing. If you've never read the Sentry and you think that he is a Superman clone, uh, we would love to challenge that, and please check it out and then let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, if you made it this far in the video, we really appreciate it. Thanks for bearing with us. There might be a few technical difficulties here or there.
Yeah,
We're still getting the hang of it. Um, please come back, visit the channel, subscribe. We're going to be tackling all sorts of different runs from Mike Rell's Green Arrow all the way until things that you might have already heard about, like The Dark Knight. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
catch you next time.